Welcome to The Authentic Life with KL, the podcast where we throw out the rule book, where we dive in head first to the real and raw, unapologetic journey of living the best life. That includes lots of music. This is your go-to space for empowerment, for deep healing and owning your authenticity like the boss that you are. We're here to break down walls and slay self-doubt. Vibe to the soundtrack of your soul. With every beat and lyric, we'll move through stories that heal and empower. You can live your fullest and most badass life. Welcome to The Authentic Life with KL. This episode of The Authentic Life with KL is brought to you by Break the Silence, a nonprofit created using music as a platform to raise awareness for mental health, suicide prevention, and recovery of all kinds, offering hope and starting the hard conversations to bring communities together. Hey y'all, it's Kitty. Today I have with me Rebel, founder of Rebelation Paranormal, music enthusiast, and so much more. My best friend, and so much more. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm good. I'm probably more excited about this than you are.
Yeah, I'm a little nervous, but well, I'm sure like anything else, we'll get through it.
We will. So, you want to tell everybody a little bit about you? I talked briefly about Revelation Paranormal in the introduction. You want to kind of tell them a little bit about what you do and who you are and all that?
So I'm Rebel. I founded Revelation Paranormal. I have a great passion with helping the other side, going out, doing investigations and things like that. Um,
She
I don't
doesn't
know.
like talking about herself. Like she's like everybody else. Like everybody else, they like, wow, I don't want to do it. She does an amazing job with. We always say I help people here. She helps people there. So,
Right.
um, anyway, so we're gonna move through all of this and as gracefully as we can. And Rebel has a
Yeah.
really beautiful story to share. It's gonna have a lot of emotion. I'll give some trigger warnings for anybody who's sensitive to topics, addiction, unalivement, suicide, thoughts, anything that has to do with mental health that would be a significant struggle. This is your time to not be in here.
Right.
or go away from the children. That's what our goal is. So I know many parts of your story, and again, I know it's going to be emotional and things like that. So we're going to kind of go into asking a couple of questions to lighten it before we get super heavy. Can you tell me what is something that inspires you when you are hiding away in the cave that we always call it? What is something or a few things that inspire you?
I would say the community that I've built around me. Learning to love myself through their eyes, like seeing their perception of me, to be okay with, loving me just as I am. Seeing their love for me and it's non-judgmental. It's, you know what I mean? It's just all that support that I never had before. So that would be one thing. And then another one would probably be, um, being able to look back and see the battles I have made it through. And, like this is just another one, we've survived 100% of our bad days. Here we are, so kind of give that little extra motivation to pick myself back up and keep going.
Keep on trucking.
Yeah.
All right. So if you had to take me back to part of your journey or back to the beginning of your journey where music really became this lifesaver for you, where would that take us to?
I mean, the very beginning would be my childhood, like sitting in my room with the big old headphones with the receiver, the big,
With the
the
record player?
100-foot cord, walking around everywhere. But music has always been, an escape for me. But it really started actually like becoming that lifeline when I was trying to come out of my addiction and into, the recovery process and trying to change things because I had gotten to the point to where I was like, I can't, like I'm going nowhere with this, but yet I don't know how to deal with these things other than going back to the addiction portion of it. So that's truly when music really started, becoming that lifeline and being able to sing lyrics that somebody else wrote, but yet feel them to that soul connection, during those times of, whatever I was going through in that moment.
Yeah, that's huge, I think, on so many levels on music. And I know you and I have had multiple conversations about it, but those songs, people discount the impact that a lot of times those songs can have on us. And it's actually sad. It makes me sad. It hurts my heart because I'm like, you have no idea. But I think that I guess I've learned maybe that's the beauty of it. Like one of my favorite things to do is just to let people tell their story. It's just something that
Right.
comes. Did you hear that? You probably didn't. There's big old thunder. Wow. Um, but just like for me, being able to hold space for people to tell their stories is really easy for me. And so when you think about maybe musicians writing songs, maybe that's something that's just, comes easy to them and it's natural and it's just a gift that they have. So they don't have to feel like maybe it's work or they're putting a lot into it. I don't know that
Right.
that's true. I'm just saying perhaps it's kind of the same way.
Right.
Like you
Right.
you talking to the dead at the cemetery. It's just easy.
Yeah, it's just easy. Yeah, when it's your passion,
Yeah.
it seems to just flow no matter whether it's art, music, paranormal investigations, it just seems to flow, naturally. At least in my opinion, it does.
Yeah, I think it's when it's something that is what people would consider as a gift, it just is something that happens and it's easy. And it
Yeah.
and it's easy. It just happens. So did you have a moment to where I guess what was your light switch moment to where you're like, all right, I'm a little too far in. I need to like jump into something that's not this when it comes to the struggle with addiction and understanding that you needed to get more into the recovery side. What was one of the first defining moments for you?
Um, well, I mean, I was a heavy addict and a heavy alcoholic. Um, Alcohol started first, and I was drinking over a gallon of liquor a day, and that wasn't including like bar tabs. And then I think the real turning point was some of the things I experienced within my addiction, having, sitting in front of doctors and them asking me, like, how are you sitting here talking to me right now? Like you should not be here. Like, I like your miracle just sitting here talking to me right now. Um, I never, it was more about numbing that pain, or that emptiness or whatever that, darkness was in my life at that time, than realizing what exactly it was that was causing it. You know what I mean? Like I knew the pain and the emptiness was there,
Did
but I
you know
couldn't
though?
pinpoint.
Did you know at that time that the reason that you were struggling with substance and things like that was because you were pushing down things or because you were filling? You didn't understand that at that time?
No, I didn't at the time. I was just a party girl,
Right.
like I'm just having
Yeah.
fun,
Yeah.
but then it became so regular, that it's just like any addiction, it takes your life over, and that becomes your highest priority instead of, like self growth or, even taking a shower, like basic hygiene things. It became the forefront in my life. And when I hit that point, it was, I hit that wall and I was just like, I can't do this anymore at that point.
Now, was it on your own accord? I know you've been to you've been inpatient some at different
Mhm.
times. Was this something that you chose on your own accord?
It
Was it
was,
some?
it was, I hit that wall and I was like, I just can't do this anymore. Like I'm literally killing myself, and checked into rehab, and that was in 2009. That was my first rehab. And then,
Was that more so for alcohol at that time, or was it for everything?
it was for everything. However, coming out of rehab, it was easier for me to stop drinking, but I still would fall upon the drugs. You know what I mean? So like I sat down, the heavy drinking every day, but it was, like having a bad day. Oh, let's go get this. You know what I mean? Like, or feeling that helplessness or that hopelessness within some situation in my life. And again, that pain or that emptiness or the discomfort, I didn't know how to deal with my emotions. So I just crammed it down and just masked everything, and used that as, my way of coping to just push it down and keep moving.
So when you talk about the avoiding the emotions at that time, at that time in your life, did you have things that were heavy emotionally, or would you say that it's just the same standard things? They just affected you more.
Um, I think kind of both, you know, my, in my childhood, I was kind of left to my own emotions, and the reason being, having the headphones on and in my room listening to the music, danced around, whatever. Um, it's like I always went back to my cave, as we say, even as a kid, so not knowing how to process those things, that's when, that initially started. But then once I got older, the drugs and alcohol came in, and that was my out of, being able to get away out of the pain or anything like that. Um, so I think it was kind of both, not knowing or understanding how to cope with them. And it was just the easy way out.
Sometimes people have like that triggering moment of they lose someone or there's something significant. Other times, it's just something that happens. But I always find that interesting. It a triggering moment for it's not for everybody. Sometimes
Yeah,
it's a culmination of so many. It's not just one triggering moment. And then for others, it is a light switch moment.
right. I know a big trigger which started the drinking and everything was, growing up in my household, uh, actually going out and like always feeling like I was never good enough, like I could never do anything right. I was always being reprimanded, and you did this wrong, you did that wrong. All my faults were being pointed out at that point. So I never felt like I would ever amount to anything. And I still struggle with that today, but at the same time, it's what kind of sent me down that road of, well, I'll just move out and then you have no control over me. And then that's when I just went buck wild at that point.
Opposite, opposite end of the spectrum. Oh yeah. So we talked about music being a lifeline at that time in your life. You said that that definitely is where it started. What artist and what songs began that journey of music being a lifeline?
I mean, of course, there's so many different songs that are relatable out there, but the biggest one that, has been through my recovery process has to be Jelly Roll, you know, because, coming out of that first rehab and then, um, like trying to learn to cope with my emotions and learn how to basically live daily life all over again, from getting out of that mindset of that, the alcohol and drugs is my main priority, and trying to get back into it. Probably the first song that really hit me from Jelly was, I think it was 2 years after I went to rehab, and it was called Fallen,
Can
and
you
it
talk about
talks.
that time frame? Because I know some people won't know that. So we're not talking just 2 years ago. We're
Yeah,
talking
no, no.
Jelly
So
Roll, like in the beginning there.
yeah, so in 2009 was when I went to my first rehab. And then 2011, I was still struggling. I was relapsing. Like I said, with the alcohol, it was easier to put down than the drugs. But I still had that guilt and that shame of still turning to the drugs. Like I can set down the alcohol. Why can't I stop this? But yet something happened. And that's the first thing that my mind went to was go get the drugs. Um, but that song Fallen, when I first heard it, it talks about, once the pain gets so much greater than where you're at, or the pain of staying where you're at, then you're willing to make that change. And I felt like rehab was that change, but yet again, that guilt and shame was still there on not being able to fully let it go, and just stop everything. So with that one, I sang from the soul, when it came out. And because I felt everything, all the lyrics like deep down within me. Now, would I tell anybody that?
Right.
Absolutely not, um, because I still had that shame of carrying around the guilt of still doing the same things over. I'm still helpless. I'm still hopeless. I'll never do it right. Like still feeling that worthlessness to, just keep doing it instead of actually finding a coping mechanism or something to push me out of that, you know.
What did it feel like when you would hear lyrics like that felt, or that was exactly how you were feeling? Like, can you explain that connection maybe that was there on you? You finally, heard something
So,
that someone else was saying that you understood.
right. So it was basically he was saying what I couldn't say. You know what I mean? Like I said, would I tell anybody, that's the way I felt? No way. Like I put on that armor and I wore the smile, and I put on a good show, you know. And but it was things that I would be screaming from the inside out, you know. And a lot of his songs met that for what point I was in my life at that time. Is that I may not know how to express my emotions, very well at the time. So when those lyrics came out, it was like, oh, driving down the road, crying, sobbing, singing your heart out. You know what I mean? Like to where nobody sees you, weak,
Yeah.
and yeah, just really feeling the music and feeling the lyrics.
Yeah. It makes you battling your demons not feel like you're battling them alone when you can hear someone singing your thoughts that are in your head. They don't even know that they're in your
Absolutely.
head,
Yeah,
but it just,
absolutely.
yeah, that's the beauty of that, just doing what comes naturally, but you are connecting with people, and it's
Hmm.
forever written in stone. Continue to connect with the people that struggle with it.
Right. And speaking of demons, that would be the next song from Jelly.
Mm,
Yeah.
I didn't know that
um,
yeah.
yeah.
That's funny.
So I think that one came out in 2017, which was, um, you know, I I relapsed big time and went deeper into my addiction than I'd ever been. Now I was still alcohol free. Once I laid the alcohol down, I stayed. I was able to stay away from it. However, I got into a relationship with my ex-wife, and the things that she would say completely broke me as a person, to where I ended up sacrificing who I was for her happiness. Like, I'll change whatever I need to change to make her happy, and this, that, and the other. And we were two addicts. And when we got together, we were both clean. And then one fell off, and then it was kind of like a tit for tat. You do this, I do that. You're going to do both of these. You know what I mean? And it was off to the races at that point. In 2017, when that song Demons came out, it was right at my divorce, and like I said, probably the darkest days of my life that I've been through in any case, whether it be the addiction or situations or whatever. I felt the most broken during that time, of, going back out and starting the addiction all over, way, way worse than what it ever was, and coming out of that divorce, not knowing who I was, not knowing where I was going. I literally walked away from the relationship with three pairs of clothes and a duffel bag, and walked away from everything, you know. But in that song, it talks about learning our demons to understand ourselves, and I thought I understood, back those years before at the first rehab, that I understood my demons. My demons were the addiction. But little did I know that the addiction is just a symptom, like that Band-Aid to put on it, I didn't realize that my demons went way deeper than what that surface level thought was, until that song. And he talks about, being there for his kids, and, this, that, and the other. And if I don't show up, then they know something's wrong, and it was trying to steer back to that, get on the right path, do the right thing, but at the same time feeling so lost because I didn't know who I was. I had changed myself so much, and I didn't even know who I was.
Yeah, losing yourself, I think, is one of the huge things. No matter what people struggle with, that loss of who you are, I think it wipes you clean, and it just
Absolutely.
it makes you just a shell, and until you can remotely even try. And some people, it takes a long time, right? I'm 48 now, I'm still trying to figure out who I am, so it takes everybody so long, and then you lose yourself. And then when you're talking about addiction, I think they don't talk about this often, is the guilt that comes along with a relapse, or with even thinking about it if you don't have a safe space. Like, the guilt.
Oh, absolutely. And I know there were times that, I would have, like, in the process of my recovery, I would have dreams to where I was using, but it felt so real that when I woke up, I was convinced that I had relapsed again, even though I was doing everything I knew how to stay on the right track, to not pick up anything. And then having those dreams and waking up and knowing, convinced that you just did it again,
I would imagine that would fuck with you mentally, for sure.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And then, people that are within my support group at that time were like, but you didn't. And I'm like, I mean, I was so convinced that I did. I was like, yes, I did. Like, I felt it. Like, I was there. Like, I did it, and they were like, no, you didn't go anywhere. You didn't,
Right.
They were like, you didn't really, and that was a hard thing to, come to terms with, on no, I didn't, but yet feeling that shame and guilt at the same time of, you know, wanting to,
Right.
and a lot of times, I didn't know it then, but during that time of my addiction, I was quietly begging that it took me out.
Yeah.
Every time I did it, I would pray. But again, I was just the life of the party wearing that mask, but I was screaming on the inside to just take me out. And it didn't matter what I did or, how much I did or whatever, that I was still waking up every day and that makes it hard too, wanting to not be here anymore and then having to wake up every day, and chase after something you really don't want, because, it being that priority in your brain at that point, like I can't function without this, and having to get up and do it all over again, it takes a toll,
Yeah.
like
It does.
mentally.
And physically, I know that
Oh
it
yeah.
absolutely destroys, bodies and mental states and all those things. Because if you're one having intrusive thoughts and you don't want to be here, right? You're just ready to go, but then you'll wake up and then you get caught on that high of like, I got to get this, I got to get this, I got to get it, and then you do the cut down, and then you do that circle over and over and over. When do you know when to stop? You know,
Right.
when do you know when to stop?
And I know during that time, also that, I tried to use sleeping pills to take myself out. Um, and then like 2 months after that, once I got out of the psych ward and everything, on medication, 2 months after that, I got arrested. And it was just one thing after another. And of course, not knowing who I was anymore, and um, basically going to jail broke one of my main morals that I have, and that also broke me because I did what I said I would never do. And I allowed myself to get so low to that point to where I stooped that low, and it took me there. So, having that guilt plus the addiction, plus, losing a marriage, plus, everything else, I was broken in the dirt, at that point. Just, there was no soul connection there. It was just me in survival
Just a
mode.
shell. Yeah,
Hmm.
just a shell on it. What would be some of your, I guess, turning moments getting you to where you are now? I know that you've gone through I know you've gone through the addiction. I know you've gone through going in treatment. I know that you were married. I know that you didn't do well once you broke one of your rules, and
Right.
and I think I think people they always think that it's just a real easy thing. So that addiction's easy. You just have to stop. Why can't you just stop? So what would be some of the moments that you could say? And I know you have songs too that bring up those memories, but that I guess more started leading you into the path where you're at now.
Um, it's a good question. I would say probably, I don't know, finding some of those songs that spoke of where I wanted to be,
Mm,
who I wanted to be. Um, while still struggling to figure that out, but at the same time, with that, still relapsing in the process. As soon as I got 2 steps forward, I'd take 10 steps back
right.
with a relapse, um, which brings me to another song that Jelly did, and it's called Only. And it talks about the feeling, um, I'm only doing right when I'm doing wrong.
Yeah.
For me, that was, I only knew the addiction portion, you know what I mean? Like I knew how to get rid of it and mask it, but I still at this point hadn't looked at what was triggering, that soul issue, whether it be the shadow work or whether it be, my opinions of how people thought about me or am I accepted or, like anything like that. It never went really that deep into it at that point. And again, the shame and the guilt of still not being able to, get past this, but yet also going back into, okay, well, this is just how I am,
Do you think that's a form? Do you think it's a form of self-sabotage almost because this is what you know and like, or you know what I'm saying? Like
Absolutely.
I haven't had that struggle, but I've lost a sibling to it, and so it's like, is it that form of this is what you know, and so I'm just going to go back to it because I know it, even when I know it's not something I need to do.
Absolutely. And starting, like once I got divorced and actually recreating who I wanted to be and getting the support around me that I truly needed, to be able to express myself and not be judged, not be called names anymore, like you're just weird. Like, why do you think that? You know what I mean? Like, just to be able to express myself was something I was never really able to do. I just shove it down and cram it down and just keep it moving. Um, but at the same time, it's just easier to numb that pain than to face it, So, and not knowing how to move forward,
Mm-hmm.
and it's just easier to pick it back up and, do the same things over and over.
Yeah. Have you had a hard time with people seeing you differently now? And how do I say that? Have you had a hard time with people seeing you differently now that you're, I'm not going to say away from the addiction or away from it because I know it's a lifelong process, but when you used, and I'm just going to speak out, my brother used to do this. So he was, we lost him to addiction. He would steal from us. He would take things. He would lie. He would do all those things. And it was part of the addiction. It wasn't like his soul per se. Like that's not who he was. It's just that's what
Right.
happened with him. I assume that you probably did some of those things. Do you feel like people don't see you for who you are now versus who you are then, that they haven't caught up to who
Absolutely.
you are?
Absolutely.
Does that make
Or they
sense?
choose not to see the changes that, an addict or somebody has made because of their past choices. Well, they do this all, they've done this for 10, 15 years. It's been the same story. They do the same things. I got to lock this up when they come over, or, you know what I'm saying? Like the back and forth. And I think that's one of the stigmas of someone in recovery because I know for me, like a lot of people in my life don't see what progress I have made,
Right.
but yet they don't take the time to actually sit down and, have a conversation with me because it's that preconceived notion of she's still the same person. She could relapse any day now, like just wait, one thing happened and there she goes again, and it's, I think that's a big stigma on anybody in recovery, whatever your addiction may be,
Yeah.
On you're trying to do your best to relearn yourself and to relearn how to live without these coping mechanisms that are unhealthy. And, you're doing everything you can, going to therapy, going to classes, going to, whatever it is you're doing for your recovery, and not being seen is, it takes you back to that shame and guilt, because then it goes back to what choices I made when I was in my addiction.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like the
I mean, it
stealing
almost
or
would
the
make you feel like,
manipulating or
yeah, it almost make you feel like, well, get the fuck out of here. I'm going to do it then. If you're going to see me
right
as being this way, then there's no reason for me to change,
for
even
me to
though you're
change.
changing for
Right.
yourself.
And that's
It's,
just our excuse to go right back into it. You
yeah,
still see
of
me
course.
this way?
Yeah.
Well, that's like, in a relationship, you're going to cheat on me. I'm going to go cheat on you. You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
if you're not going to see me this way, why should I change it? And it's, I know that's been a really big struggle for me, throughout my recovery process, is not being seen for the progress I have made, and still those assumptions that I'm still the same person, or I'm going to make the same choices I did within that, the addiction. And that, that's a hard one,
Do
you
you
know.
don't throw tomatoes at me on this,
I
because I'm just, I have things come to me. Do you think that people treating you as if you haven't changed or not getting to know who you are, do you think that in some ways gives you an excuse not to step outside of your box to grow into more of who you want to become, because you feel like you could hold on to that almost as an excuse? Does that make sense? Like,
absolutely,
I'm just,
absolutely.
because you and I know each other very well, and it's like that's just coming to me, and I was like, oh, I wonder if like that's an easy way for me to be like, listen, I can't do anything, so I'm just going to sit here and be frozen. It's like you're in the fight or flight, but you're in the frozen state and not wanting, because what
Yeah,
if you
it
make a
kind of throws you
mistake?
back. Yeah, it kind of throws
Yeah,
you back into that survival mode of
yeah,
when you were in your addiction. You know what I mean? Like, you do anything to get what you needed, and it didn't matter the consequence. It didn't matter who it hurt. It didn't matter. It kind of, and then people not seeing you making a
yeah.
change. It's way easier to say, oh, okay, well, you don't see
Yeah.
me, well, I might as well do it.
Yeah,
So
because if
yeah,
you guys, if you
absolutely.
can have faith in me, then I definitely can't have faith in me. So I'm just
Right.
gonna stay here and hide and never do anything because I'm terrified because everyone else still sees me as this, and maybe I am. Like it just would affect you in such a way that it
Right.
would have you have such small self belief in your strength, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah, absolutely. And that kind of leads into another song that really hit me from Jelly, was Glitter. And it talks about, I lost my soul, and just because it glitters doesn't make it gold. So that, using that excuse of they don't see me, they don't see what I'm doing, that gold is like, hey, I'm right over here, so it's like, it's easy to just go back to it, because you're not only, one, you're trying to get rid of the substance, out of your routine and your daily life, but also trying to cope with the decisions you've made, your mental health, getting it back to where it needs to be, your physical health, the acceptance of, family and friends, and they talk about you losing a lot of your
I was just gonna
people,
ask about that. Yeah.
when you go into recovery. And I like everybody,
Yeah.
everybody that I thought was there for me. Once I went into recovery and became like serious about it, that was, they all disappeared. And here I am again, sitting by myself with my own emotions, trying to figure all this out, trying to get out of survival mode. And, trying to cope with the emotions of daily life and feeling like, again, I'm still not worthy of, all of this. Like you said, it would just be easier to, okay,
Yeah.
well, I'll just go back out and do what I know
Like
how to
maybe
do.
you guys are right. Like I don't know. I thought I was doing good. Like
Yeah.
maybe
Yeah.
you're right. I don't.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's I know a lot of people that have been in recovery that that's one of their main reasons why they go back out and relapse is because they're not being seen. We don't learn the coping mechanisms for our emotions. So when something, goes haywire, it's
Mhm.
like, what do I do with this? And so it is that natural, stir away from it to just go back to what we know.
Yeah. Well, and this is just being honest with it. There people who don't struggle with addiction and things like that, I don't think that, and that would be me included on that part. I think they don't understand that it takes away the pain pretty immediately and numbs it away. And there's not anything else out there that absolutely just makes it go away immediately. When you choose recovery, you choose the hard route. Like a lot of times people think like you know, they will say, addiction is the easy road and things like that. And I would bounce back and forth sometimes on that because it's not easy because coming out of it is very, very hard, but it's even harder to stay out of it. It's even harder to self forgive on all the things
Oh,
that have
yeah, that's a
happened.
big one.
Like, I definitely want to talk about that too. But I think that walking away from something that makes everything go away in a very quick time
It's very
is
quick. However, once it wears off,
right, right. Yeah,
everything's
yeah,
flooding back in. But now, if you've made choices get to go get it, of manipulating somebody, lying to somebody, so then you have even more built on top of it,
yeah.
to where it you have that guilt and that shame because you did it again,
Right. It's a
but
vicious
yet
cycle.
here
Yeah,
I
yeah.
am. I feel so much better, so let's just forget it,
Yeah, for 5
and
seconds or however long or whatever. But
yeah,
it
yeah,
is. And so there's not anything, and I think that that is one of the big struggles. And we could always go into like the body chemistry and like genetics and all those things because that all definitely plays a role in it. But in the end, there's not anything that makes things go away quite so quickly. And I think that's the reason why it's so easy to fall
absolutely.
into that. um, as children, we are not taught how to self regulate, right? When we were little and you start acting out, your parents, my parents, even me as a parent was like, shh, be quiet, don't do that. People are going to look at you. And so you
Right,
grow up, you don't know how to self regulate. So
right.
as you have grown, I know that we all, including myself, have problems sometimes when we're really struggling on that self regulation, on emotions and things like that. But what are some things that um, help you walk through some of the emotional turmoil and the balancing out?
um I think the most helpful thing for me recently in these last couple years is being able to just open up and to talk to somebody. Like I said, having that support to where I can openly discuss things, whether they make sense to me or not, to be able to voice them and then kind of have like a soundboard to, to like bounce it off with somebody else that may see a totally different perspective that I'm not capable of seeing, because like I said, I would just shove it down and never talk to anybody about it, throw on that happy face, and nobody ever knew how much I was suffering underneath. I hid it so well, even for my family. They knew I was in my addiction. They knew the things that I did, but at the same time, they didn't know the extent of how much I didn't want to be here, and um, for me, when I was younger, I would self harm. So then once I found the drugs and the alcohol, that was a way quicker way of, doing that. But yet I didn't have the repercussions and consequences of self-harming.
Right.
Yes, it's tearing my body up. Yes, it's deteriorating my mental health, but like you said, it's that quick fix.
Yeah.
And so that's when we were off to the races there, on that. Because once I started the addiction portion of it, that's when the self-harm kind of, settled down, because it was that fix to where I didn't feel, basically the drugs and alcohol were that release that I was
Right.
looking for,
Yeah.
and it's just the pent up pain and guilt and shame and everything else in there.
Yeah. What if you were to give somebody advice on what they should say to someone who they know is struggling with addiction, with active addiction, what is something you think that someone may be able to say that would actually be beneficial instead of a lot of the preconceived judgments and things like that?
First thing I would say is you're not what you think you are. You're not helpless. You're not worthless. You're not, everybody matters. I don't care what the situation is or the reasoning or, why you do it. Just know that you are worthy of being somebody, and living a beautiful life, just like anybody else on this earth. We just took a different road, and that if they needed me, I would be willing to sit there in the dark with them, even if they had relapsed and now they're feeling the guilt and shame during that relapse. I would still sit there with them, and even if it's just in silence,
Yeah.
just to let them know they're not alone. They're not fighting this, even though you feel like the last person on earth, of feeling alone. But at the same time, you know, just knowing somebody's there, is something I never had. So for me, that's a big portion of, friends or family or whoever is going through addiction and trying to do the recovery process, and even for myself, just I learned that importance once I started opening up, of how much not only can you get those other perspectives, that outside view, but you also start learning yourself,
Yeah.
And if they're willing to do the work, I'm willing to walk beside you, but nobody can do that work but you.
So true. So true.
Because I was blaming everybody else. It's their fault I'm this way. It's their fault I did this. You know what I mean? Like, and it took me a lot of years to realize, like, I have fault in this too. But that was the mindset, during the addiction, was this is all happening to me, not for me.
Yeah. That forgive, I
So
mean, the forgiveness part I know is hard just across the board, no matter what we're talking about for any kind of healing, because I think there's always that misconception of, if you forgive people, then that means you're letting them off scot-free. So if you have been abused, if you have any of these things happen, it's like, no, I'm not going to forgive them. Like, I'm not going to do it. But you're literally giving them space in your head. I say scot-free. It's really not, because it's actually the most expensive rent that you could give someone is to live in your head, right?
absolutely.
And yeah, it doesn't matter what's happened. Like, forgiveness is huge because you're allowing them not to control you anymore. And it's just a constant struggle, I think, just as much as everything else for everybody. But um, how about that self-forgiveness, Rebel?
That's a hard one. I mean, it's
Yeah.
one thing, so there were a lot of people in my life that, like I said, I would blame, like this is why I'm the way I am, or this is why I did that, and taking that step back, not only learning myself, and taking that accountability for my own actions during that time, and seeing it from that different light, it learning to forgive them, even though I was dead set. I, that's unforgivable. You know what I mean? But today, the more self improvement I've done, I see that they have their own traumas, they have their own stuff, they have their own patterns, their own generational stuff, and I had to separate from this is my family member, this is what they did.
Yeah, no.
You know what I mean? But then taking a step back and looking at them as a person, not the expectations because they are this family member,
That
and
was
this is
life
what
changing.
is
Yeah, for me
expected,
too.
Um, I can say today that forgiving myself is a little easier, by learning how to forgive others.
Mm.
It's still not easy. I'll tell you that it's not easy. Um, and, I've gone through some things here recently that I thought I'd let go of,
Yeah, I
and
want to talk
forgiven.
about that. I want to talk about that. I'm actually going to ask you about losing. I'm not trying to interrupt you, but I do think that there's some real gold within this story because um a lot of people don't talk about the people that you lose and how you find yourself in situations that are no longer for you anymore. And you don't have to go into detail, but I was going to have you kind of talk a little bit about it because I know you've given some circumstances before of like, yeah, I went here and I just kind of knew this wasn't my place anymore.
Mhm.
And I wanted you to, talk a little bit about like what that feels like. That's something people don't think about. And I think that's a huge fallback point for people too.
Oh, absolutely. So, after me and my ex-wife split and got a divorce and everything, those people kind of fell off,
Mm.
our mutual friends, things like that. Um, I had a friend pass that was a mutual friend of ours, and I felt this need that I had to go. Like I had to go. Couldn't tell you why. Like I haven't talked to her since then, but I felt like I had to go. Well, I got up that day, got ready, got dressed, and in recreating myself, who I am, who I want to be, um, and the self improvements and things like that, I got up and I put on my suit and I went to the services. And I still, even driving there, I'm like, why are you like, why are we doing all this? You know what I mean? And I kept telling myself to say goodbyes and show respect, like they were still a good person, yeah, we were not doing some great things when we all hung out, whatever, but you know what I mean? Like addicts are still good people too, you know? So I kept telling myself like, it's just saying goodbye. Like, I have to go say goodbye. Well, then when I left, that's when I realized that it wasn't the person I was saying goodbye to. It was the broken me from that time, my addiction, like the darkest days I've ever had in my life, saying goodbye to what I called home, you know, where I called home, who I called home for those many years to, let that go. Going back into that town, seeing the same people, it was letting that go when I thought I had forgiven myself and let it go and grieved that portion of my life. But I never officially like let it go. I kept telling
You never
myself I'd
had a
let it go.
funeral. You never had a
Yeah.
funeral. You did
Yeah.
what the Disney movie says and let it go, but
Right.
you never had a funeral.
But it hit me once I left, and I'm like, okay, back then I would have shown up in tattered t-shirt and holes in my jeans, at the service. Like, why was it so important for me to be who I am today? To show up just to say goodbye whenever, like, all the family and everybody else is in t-shirts, jeans, sweatshirts, here I am in a suit. But yeah, it made me realize that sometimes when we think we've let it go, we're still holding on to it. And I had no idea that I was still holding on to it, because I was like, no, I'm done with that. It's over. I'm not there anymore. I'm taking the steps today to keep moving forward on who I want to be, where I want to be, what I want to do. So it was a real eye opener that even though we think it's done with, sometimes it's not done with. It's that subconscious part that holds on to it. And that's where a lot of my self-forgiveness came in, was with my ex-wife and breaking that moral, and after I left that service and feeling like I'd said goodbye to the town and the people and that portion of my life, it felt like a huge weight had been lifted off of me for myself, for my own self-forgiveness, because yeah, I could have went back down that same road, but here I am today. Yes, I still fall down, you know, but I'm still standing back up and keep moving forward on where I want to go. It's not a fall down and just lay there, like it used to, or try to mask it or try to, do whatever I knew to like suppress it.
Yeah. What do you think? Well, I won't say what do you think. I I think grieving our prior self and who we were. I know we've done like cord cutting things. So we talk about letting go of your prior self and all those things, but and again, these are all things that they don't talk about everywhere. So that's why, we're holding space like we do to talk about and have the hard conversations. But grieving who you used to be, right, is the hardest thing because that person was the best for you at that time and made some bad decisions, but by God, they felt comfortable. They made
And
all
you
the comfortable
wholeheartedly
decisions.
believe that, this is who I am. Like this is it,
Right.
and then having that ripped out from under you. Like I said, me leaving with a duffel bag and that's it,
Right.
with 3 pairs of clothes in it,
Right.
and like not knowing where I'm going, not knowing, anything. And it just, it's an eye opener on, where I am today to where I was. But yet in that moment, I'm like, yeah, this is me, like very confident,
Right. Right. We know it all the time.
Yeah.
And then we look back and we're like, we're damn jackasses. We just are.
Yeah.
Like we say that, I think it's funny because we always like, oh, teenagers know everything. But no, any prior us knows everything, clearly.
Yeah, yeah. And
We
then
know it
we
all.
learn that lesson and we're like, oh man, I didn't know nothing.
Yeah, no, and I know that's part of the journey, but it's just really
Yeah.
funny. It's funny to think about. What do you think that little rebel, or I'll say little Christy, because that's not who you are anymore. What do you think little Christy needs to hear today for you
Oh
just to
Lord.
continue moving forward and being the powerhouse that you are? What do you think?
Probably that I'm accepted for who I am,
Mm,
whether people see it or not.
Yeah.
And if they don't see it for who I am, then that's their loss.
Yeah. I think that that's beautiful. I think
Yeah.
that it's this really beautiful picture of any of us, but I'll use you because, you're in the spotlight right now. I
I'm
had
here,
you in the
might as well.
spotlight, might as well. But seeing like you now, talking to the younger version of yourself and saying, I know that things really suck, but like in 10, 20 years, like you're going to have family and friends and people who love you for who you are. None of this shit is going to matter,
Right.
and I think that that's so impactful, to know where you're at, to be able to say something like that to your, if you want to say inner child, younger self, whatever it may be, because I think that the more self growth that we do, and we can think about those things, like I'm like, man, I really should have done this. Like, and me, I would tell my 15-year-old self the stuff I'm doing today, I'd be like, you're a cool bitch. Like, that's
Right.
awesome.
Right.
But like, it's so bad when you're so young. You just think life's terrible. But
Yeah.
I think that there is some real beauty in that, to being able to distinguish between what did I need to hear? What kind of things should someone have said to me? Or,
Yeah.
you know, I think that there's definitely something to be said to that. Is there any other songs that were really impactful for you from Jelly Roll, since we're on Jelly Roll?
Um, Another one would probably be Creature.
Mhm.
He talks about the struggle again with our demons. But it says like demons screaming in the distance, creatures are such a humbling sound. The monster that's outside my window, he's like family to me now. So, to me, that can kind of go both ways. Creature being the addiction, because that's my friend. That's, what's numbing everything, that's taking everything away that I don't know how to deal with, but also the relapse portion of it, because it's that creature. Again, he's my
Blinking
friend.
around. He's
Yeah,
looking, are
yeah.
you weak right now?
Yeah, going
Yeah.
like, oh, one wrong move, and guess what?
Ah, I see
Hey, I'm over
you.
here,
Yeah.
so it seemed that my darkness became my comfortable place, and that creature that was always there, I could count on. I could count on it always being there. When everything else in my life was wherever it was, whatever was going on, I knew that he was right there, and um when you're, at least in my addiction, I was so alone. I could be in a room full of people, but I was so alone, and then when that creature comes in, it's like, hey buddy, like, yeah.
Yeah. We're
Yeah.
joking. It's not funny, but that's we're demented, that we joke about things that are
Yeah.
not. Yeah. We're not crying,
But
so it's good.
yeah, but I mean, the other one that really hit me more recently, of course, I mean, Save Me is another good one, because with the Save Me, it's again that silent screaming for help
Yeah.
when you don't know how to ask for the help. Like, you don't know your starting point, you don't know, you just know you can't do this anymore. But the most recent one is probably Dancing with the Devil,
Mm.
because even though you know I've pushed away from the addiction, I still have relapses. Like you said, it's a lifelong fight at this point, just because it's, you know, the emotions get too much, or again, not having the right coping skill in place yet, or learn that coping skill to use for the different situations yet. Um, it says, I've gotten used to feeling this low. I'm on the edge, just losing control. So like when things are kind of like all over the place, It's then I think one of the other lines was only thing keeping him from stealing my soul. Don't let me go. I only dance with the devil I know. So it's kind of going back to that relapse that, this is what I know. This is, it's hard trying to relearn how to live and not survive.
Yep.
How to actually thrive in your life and not just skate by every day, to get you by. So there are those rough days. It does feel like you're dancing with the devil all the time, because again, the creature is our friend, and you're screaming for help, but yet again, you hit that wall and you're like, well, this is what I know. This is
Yeah.
Here we go, and that's why a lot of people, go back out and relapse again.
I got some stuff going here.
Go for it.
No, it's kind of just all over. What do you think is the biggest misconception when it comes to, say, family members, right? I have lots of family members and my brother passed away and everybody has their own shit that they say about people who are addicts. What do you think is the biggest misconception about addiction or people who struggle?
That you can just put it down, because it's until you hit that core root emotionally, on that soul level, like whatever it is, until you can find that root that's making you feel hopeless, helpless, worthless, ashamed, guilt, like whatever it is, until you can find that root, not being accepted, not being seen, it's not going to change. Like you could throw, I've been in probably 7 to 8 different rehabs, throughout the years. And they all told us the same thing, throwing all these coping skills at us, you know, yes, they're slightly different, but yet they're all the same. But until you can understand with that root cause of what triggers you to do this, only then can you really use that coping skill to understand and effectively use it. Otherwise, you feel like you're just using a coping skill, but nothing's changing.
Do you feel like that's possibly some of the, I guess, skills that are missing when people, I think when people go into rehab, of course, they're looking for something, right? They're wanting for something to take this away, just like that, right? Took
Right.
things away. But I know that they do the best that they know how to do. But do you think that it's the coping mechanisms? What do you think is lacking there within these programs that cause, I guess, they don't cause failure, but leads to, relapsing and failure? What do you think that they could teach differently? Is there anything they could teach differently that would help more?
Well, like they throw the coping skills of, when this type of situation happens, take a step back, do this, do that,
Right.
you know what I mean? Like things like that. But again, it doesn't really bring up the emotion part of it.
Right.
And for me, that's what always led me down my addiction was my emotions,
Right.
and feeling like I was alone, like I didn't fit in, like I wasn't supposed to be here, that I didn't want to be here, and until I was able to face the emotional side of it. Like I said, you could throw coping skills at me all
Yeah.
day long.
Yeah.
I've been in therapy for years, even throughout my addiction. And, they could tell me things to do, and I would do them, but nothing would change. It wasn't until I started doing my own shadow work
Yeah.
is when I truly started seeing those roots and those triggers of the emotions. And then once I could find that root, say, oh, okay, well, I felt like I was not accepted.
Right.
So therefore, this made me feel alone, worthless, and then that led into the masking and the covering up of the pain from that. But if you can't get to that root, you can throw all the tools in the world at them.
Yep.
You know what I mean? But
Yeah.
till that person can truly like dig deep and find what initially sent you down that path. And I mean, it's great that it masks it. You know what I'm saying? Like
Right.
that's what keeps taking you back, but until you can get that root, you can give them everything in the world that they need to succeed, but until they understand it themselves, like at least for me, I it didn't work, until, like I said, I started figuring out, okay, in my childhood this happened, which led to this and this and this, and then my addiction started because I felt this for so long that I accepted that's the way it was. And then when this happened, it was just the gateway to,
Yeah.
to go off and further into the addiction.
Yeah. What would you say to your family and friends today? Like, what do you want them to know about you? The people who have misjudged you, who have assumed, who refuse to see you differently. What is something that you want to tell them that's something truly from the heart that you want them to know?
That people can change, you know. I think it's under the right circumstances and the right time for them, not on their perceptions or expectations of when that person should change. Um, but also at the same time, learning to be okay without them accepting me,
Mm, yeah.
learning to be okay with, well, that's your opinion. Doesn't mean it's mine,
That's an
and
interesting point of view.
right.
Well, it's
But
so
being, I
interesting.
mean, that's still a real big struggle for me, but I'm
Yeah.
learning to be okay with it, as to where my inner child wants nothing but to be accepted, So it's trying to learn that balance of the boundary, and I'm not going to let you control me anymore. Again, with the forgiveness and the self forgiveness, it's kind of trying to find that balance of being okay with whatever their opinion of you is, but at the same time, being okay with yourself, because I know in my addiction, I was not okay with myself, but I just didn't give a shit. Like I just did whatever I wanted to when I wanted to and
Yeah.
didn't have a care in the world.
I think it's a special place to be. And I'm not always there, but I think it's a special place to be when you're like, I'm a badass bitch. Why? But I'm a badass bitch. But then
Right.
sometimes, of course, you're like, okay, I'm all emotional. But
Yeah, yeah.
it's like I think it's a special place that we get to, even if you can do it like once in a blue moon, like being able to appreciate how far you've come and like the changes that you've made, I think is paramount just in our growth and just day to day is being able to see yourself when we're just always wanting to be seen. But if we could just see
And that's
ourselves.
that's another hard thing to learn how to do is to see yourself in your true light, and not all those preconceived judgments you had of yourself
Yeah.
because of the guilt or the shame or the grief or the, choices or consequences that you went through or situations like, I should have handled that better. I shouldn't have done this. I should have done that. But also learning to be okay with that and, to keep moving forward because that was then, that's not right now, and all we have is right now. So, that's a hard one to get through and move through too. But at the same time, it's very freeing once you can.
I'm convinced that none of us really can see ourselves the same way that other people can. Like I I've thought about this. I think the way we see our faces if we're on mushrooms, like I often think I'm like, I think that might be what I look like, but then we don't get
Right.
to see like what other people how they actually see us. So the more that you dive into like, do I look like what I think I look like? Because other people see you differently, just like I see you differently than you see yourself. So it's like, do we really see ourselves like all mangled up and all weird and stuff? And then other people see we're this picture perfection that we're like, I don't get it. So I think that that's just a really, I think it's a fun way to think about it.
Yeah, yeah, it
Because
is
it's like,
because you don't I mean, I never really stopped and thought about what actually do I think of
yeah,
myself. I know I
yeah,
have the negative self-talk.
right.
I'll talk myself out of anything.
Yeah,
I'll give excuses, I'll self-sabotage, whether I know I'm consciously doing it or not. Like,
yeah, yeah,
it's just this is me,
yeah,
but yet to somebody else, they see a completely different view of it.
yeah,
Even though we think it's, unhealthy or whatever, it might be our coping mechanism,
yeah.
to process things or to work through a situation or whatever it might be,
Yeah.
and it can be somebody's,
Yeah.
coping
Yeah.
mechanism
Yeah. A true
to
test
help
of
them.
how we're doing is to be seen by someone else that you trust, because we are not the good judge.
Right.
If my nose is over here and you're like, you're so pretty, I'm like, yeah, okay. So, but you know what I mean? It's not just about that, but it is,
Yeah.
we just don't see ourselves, through that light often. If you could say something to Jelly Roll on him writing things so vulnerable and it connecting with you, what would you say directly to him?
I would thank him for one, being vulnerable, being able to tell his own story.
Mhm.
Being a Nashville native myself, I've known Jelly Roll's music for years,
Mhm.
before he ever got big and, in the last couple years or whatever. So, knowing where he was to where he is today and being able to be vulnerable like that has actually helped me become vulnerable myself. I remember the first time you asked me to tell my story, and I was terrified. I'm like, everybody's going to judge me. Everybody's going to do this. Everybody's going to do that. But one thing about Jelly was it's like he didn't care what people thought. He wrote his songs because he knew they were relatable, whether it was his situation or somebody else's situation. Him being vulnerable enough to write those emotions down, I think has been a lifeline for a lot of people, and, it gives motivation, it gives inspiration, it gives, that things can change. You can pull yourself out of the darkest depths that you've ever been in to rise again, it just makes that, it takes a conscious effort to change the things and learn yourself and how to get there and keep moving forward and things like that. So I would tell him thank you, for
Yeah.
just being vulnerable enough with yourself,
Yeah.
to see these situations or whatever caused him to write these songs. Because even some of his rap music, back in the day, I, in my addiction, I related so much to that too. But at the same time, now that he's, coming in recovery himself and changing things around, I think it gives hope. And a lot of times that's all we're looking for is hope that this can, hope and faith that this can turn around. I can make a change. It may not be a big one, but if I don't go over or make this call or, whatever, I can go to the park instead of going down the road those are the subtle changes that it takes every day to make that difference. So I would, number one, tell him how proud, that he's able to change his story like he has to be where he's at today, and expressing the gratitude of writing those songs that are so relatable to so many, whether they're in addiction, have loved ones in addiction, like watching it play out, like whatever it is. There's so many people, it's so many different lives out there that his music touches.
Yeah. There's not enough hope. There's
Absolutely.
just not enough hope. There's really not. If you had someone come to you and they were struggling with mental health, not me today, I'm not coming to you with my mental. If you had someone truly coming to you and they were struggling with intrusive thoughts, with depression, anything like that, what are some things that you would offer to tell them to keep them here another day?
um it kind of sounds cliche, but the sun always comes out after it rains. You don't need a temporary fix or a permanent fix to a temporary solution. You know, um, yes, what you feel right now is extreme.
Mm.
However, not always are emotions facts, you know, because for me, I didn't like to feel mine, reason for the addiction. So just being able to feel those out and talk about it or express it in some way, whether it's drawing, art, music, video games, like whatever your outlet is, to try to refocus that energy into something that you're passionate about.
Yeah.
And that don't give up, because I wanted to give up so many times, multiple times a day for years, and because I never thought it would be different. And here I am sitting today, and it's a complete turnaround from where I was. Like I said, do I still fall? Absolutely. You know, but each day gets easier. And just because those emotions are so strong in that moment doesn't mean they're going to be that way forever. Like, this is just temporary. This too shall pass. We just got to get through it, And again, if you need me to sit in the dark with you, I'll sit in the dark. We'll sit in silence. If you just need to, have somebody in the room,
Yeah.
I'm there. Just don't give up before the miracle can happen.
Mm, I like that. So now
Yeah.
I'm gonna get this little tidbit. And anytime you're anybody struggling, I'm just gonna
Oh God.
replay it. Like, you said it, not me.
I see
No,
you now,
that's
flipping that
true.
one little clip,
Oh,
and then on those bad days, like, watch this.
watch this, girl. Listen to what you said. No,
Yeah.
it's true. It's true. And I will say that the whole sitting together in the dark, or if people need people, like that's my favorite part, one, about our friendship, but also about our community, because truly the people that we have in there, if you don't want anybody to say anything, like, you're all kinds of fucked up in your own head and you don't need anybody to talk to you, you just need someone to sit there, like, that's what they'll do, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I've had a friend
Yeah.
call me and they're like, "Hey, will you watch this movie with me?"
Yeah.
On video chat. Absolutely. I mean, like, I don't even have to see the movie. Set your phone down, like, you chill out, because they were going through something. And I'm like, absolutely. I'll sit here. And they're like, you still here? And I'm like, yeah, I'm still here. Like, even though I'm doing my own thing over here, like,
Right,
I'm
right.
still there. so to let them know, yeah, I'm still here, and then
That's important.
once they calm down, they're like, okay, thank you, whatever. But if it's, you want to read a book to me, you want to watch a movie, like, but you don't want me talking to you, that's absolutely fine,
Get it.
because there were plenty of times on my bad days that I just wish somebody was in the same room with me,
Yeah.
because then if I knew if somebody was still in the same room, that these intrusive thoughts and things, you know what I mean, like that are going
Right.
on in my head are not going to drive me to take an action
Yeah.
that I'll regret later,
Yeah.
you know? So, yeah, absolutely. I'll watch a movie with you. You know, like whatever you need. If you want to sing to me, if you want me to sing to you, if you want me to look up some dad jokes, like,
Yeah. Whatever it is, whatever it is.
yeah, yeah.
Well, I'm going to end it on I have this little poem I found today I'm going to read. It's I think you'll love it. This story matters, this voice matters, this survival matters. Tonight was not just a conversation, it's a remembering. It's a thank you whispered across miles of darkness and years of struggle. To the music that stitched the broken pieces back together, to the lyrics that kept breath in tired lungs, and to the artist who dared to bleed into public so that others could quietly live. And most of all, to the soul sitting across from me right here in this screen. Your light was never fragile. It was only waiting for the right songs to wake it up again. Thank you for trusting your truth. Thank you for surviving. And thank you for shining even when it hurts. Tell your story, not because it's perfect, but because it's real. And real is the only thing that saves. So I found that and I
I
was
like
like,
it. I like
I
it.
love it. Yeah, so good. So
Yeah.
thank you for jumping on and
But yeah, anytime.
do it again.